Hello and welcome back to the Royal Record. Every week we'll be bringing you exclusive news and analysis of the royal family and what goes on behind palace walls. I'm Cameron Walker, GB News' Royal Correspondent.
And I'm Svar Nanan-Sen, Royal Editor of gbnews.com. You can get in touch and let us know your thoughts on anything we discussed this week by using the hashtag GBN Royal Record or emailing royal@gbnews.uk.
Indeed, and thank you so much for all your feedback from last week with our interview with Alistair Stewart, as well as the questions that you've sent in. We'll be getting to a couple of those later on in the show. But our guest this week, let's say, is not particularly popular with royal fans. However, there is a growing following of Republicans in the United Kingdom. It's still a minority, but here at GB News, we want to give views of everybody in the country. So I would like to welcome Graham Smith, Chief Executive of Republic. Welcome to the Royal Record.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you. So first of all, you clearly do not particularly like King Charles as head of state, do you? What is your alternative to a constitutional monarchy?
Well, the alternative is very common across Europe and around the world. It's a parliamentary system with an elected head of state. So we're not talking about a US or French style system. So there's no Macron or Trump kind of figure that we're thinking about. If you look at Ireland, Germany, Finland, Iceland, right across Europe, it's a parliamentary system. So it's what we have now, but it's democratic from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm. So Margaret Tabbits at the University of Washington, she says that monarchs can be truly above politics because they usually have no party connections and have not been involved in daily politics before assuming the post of perhaps, as you say, a presidential head of state. What would you say to that argument?
Well, it's a bit of a non-starter, really, because Charles particularly is highly political. Everybody is political in some sense. And yes, it might not be party political, but presidents in parliamentary systems resign their membership of any party that they might have been in the same way that the Speaker of the House of Commons does. And then they are expected to behave in a way which is non-partisan. And the proof is in the pudding. You have to actually see them being non-partisan and know what they're doing and know what their thoughts are, so you can judge as to whether they are doing that properly. We can't judge Charles because, firstly, we don't know what his personal views are on a lot of things, although we do on some. And secondly, we don't know what he's doing behind closed doors because they are surrounded by secrecy. So there's no, and even if we did know he was doing something wrong, there's no way of getting rid of him. So having a political past does not stop you from being a non-partisan head of state, as we've seen right across Europe.
So, Graham, if the UK did elect an independent head of state, what would happen to the royal family? Would they be stripped of their royal titles? How would that work?
Well, a republic is about being equal citizens. It's about finishing that long process of evolution that we've gone through since, the 17th century, where we have gone from, we had to fight tooth and nail against, the monarch and against the landowning classes, if you like, to get democracy, and we've sort of stalled. And a republic is about finishing that job so that we are genuinely citizens, not subjects. In a republic like that, then obviously you can't have aristocratic titles and royal titles and all that. So Charles will be Charles Windsor or Windsor Mountbatten, whichever name he chooses. He will be a citizen like anyone else. He'll pay taxes like anyone else, and he'll be free to stand for election or not, or just go off and live a nice life of luxury. He'll still be very rich, but he will be free of the obligations of royalty, free of the titles of royalty, and he'll have obligations to pay tax.
On the Republic website, you've gone into a lot of detail as to how a republic would work in the United Kingdom. We're coming into a general election period now, yet none of the main parties they're not offering the electorate a referendum on becoming a republic. They're not offering the chance for the electorate to vote to abolish the monarchy. So, it's a long way off, if ever that's going to happen.
Well, you would have said that in 2015, the main parties weren't really expecting to offer up referendums on things like Brexit. In 2010, certainly there wasn't much of a prospect of referendums on changing the voting system or Scottish independence. And yet all these things have happened. So the strategy of campaigners like us isn't to simply hope that politicians come around to our way of thinking and give us what we want, but to put the pressure on them so that they give us what we think the country needs. And this has been happening in other countries. So the Australian Republican movement was granted by a monarchist prime minister. The New Zealand electoral reform referendums 30 years ago were given by politicians who opposed electoral reform. So, there are ways and strategies of doing that. And the key is to change public opinion, and that is changing.
So do you envision one of the major political parties eventually offering a referendum on the royal family?
Well, they're going to have to at some point. Politicians will at some point see that there's a public appetite for having a debate on this and will grant a referendum. Now, they will probably do that whilst also saying we should keep the monarchy. They may do that while saying we should get rid of it, but either way, it doesn't sort of matter as long as we have the vote. And I think what's one of the lessons from the 3 referendums we've had over the last decade or so is that it's actually better for a change campaign to come up from grassroots, to be something which the people feel is important against the interests of the politicians. Because this is a politician's monarchy. There's a reason why politicians like it, because it gives them an awful lot of power.
The people in Australia, I would say, are perhaps more inclined to have a public debate on the Republican movement than they are in the United Kingdom, and yet the Australian government has shelved their plans to hold a referendum.
Well, they've shelved them for the time being for the sole reason that they've had a referendum last year and it failed, and they got that badly wrong. They misjudged the mood, and they didn't campaign very effectively on a referendum for an Aboriginal voice, and so they're reluctant to do a second referendum anytime soon. So that's a particular reason for that. But that will happen, and I think the Australian Republicans need to rethink their strategy in terms of putting pressure on the government to bring that back. They also have a higher bar to pass a referendum because they have to get a majority in a majority of the states, as well as a majority across the whole of Australia, where we just have to get a simple majority. So in this country, it's definitely doable. And as I say, if you look at Brexit, no one expected that to get through. If you look at the Scottish independence movement, they lost, but they jumped by 15 points between the time of calling the referendum and polling day. So the debate itself will shift opinion, and we're seeing polling out from people like YouGov and Savanta, which put the monarchy on about 55%, which is 30 points, maybe 25 points down from where they were a few years ago. And support for abolition is up over or around a third of the country, whereas up until a few years ago it was around 20%.
We did do a poll this week for our GB News members, asking them specifically, should King Charles remain the UK's head of state?
Yep.
So the results on this were from 560 members who voted in the poll. A huge majority of 81% voted yes, Charles should remain the UK's head of state. 18% voted no, with 1% saying they did not know. So that's an overwhelming majority of our readers and viewers who stand by King Charles.
Well, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that the viewers of GB News tend to be more conservative than the wider population. But what I would say to people who like Charles and who want him as head of state is vote for him. Because if you are saying, look, I like Charles, I want him as head of state, but I don't want to vote in case he loses. What's the difference between doing that and saying, well, I like Sunak, I think he should stay Prime Minister, and therefore we should cancel the general election. You have to, absolutely fine to like Charles if that's what you like. Personally, I wouldn't vote for him. I don't think he would stand the scrutiny because he doesn't like being criticised and challenged. But if you want him to be head of state, vote for him. A lot of the polling is the age group up to the age of 50. The support is dropping sharply. So it's quite a large group. Having just turned 50, if that's still young, that's great. But it's quite a large body of the public opinion. So it's really, as I said, there's polling that sort of puts it, the most generous polling puts them around 60%. The Savanta polling we've done is around 54, 55%, and that is being held up over the 50% mark by those who are over 65. And that's going to change because people are not changing their views so much now as they get older, as they used to in the past.
Well, you say that, but there's a opinion poll from the year 2000 from the Independent Communications and Marketing Research Company, which found that 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds believe that Britain would be better off with an elected head of state rather than a member of the royal family. Those 18 to 24-year-olds that were surveyed in 2000 are now 42 to 48, roughly. And the average percentage of adults surveyed across that age category with the Savanta poll that you did was 36%, and therefore it's kind of gone down. So does that show that it's younger people more inclined?
It's gone down marginally, but I think that that age group, 36%, saying we should get rid of it is quite a significant climb up, because obviously in 2000 the monarchy was going through a bit of a tough time. It was only just after the death of Diana. They hadn't yet sort of brought out William and Harry and all the PR around them to try and rebuild that image. So, and I think there was just a very different mood in the country. But I think that across the breadth of the polling, clearly there is a significant change in the way people feel about it. And among people under the age of 25, it is a significant drop.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something you mentioned just then about how the monarchy has kind of rebuilt under William and Harry and how they were a big part of that. We've now seen Prince Harry step away as a working royal, and he now lives his life in America with Meghan Markle. Would you want the Prince and Princess of Wales to follow a similar path to Harry and Meghan?
Yeah, but I think they all ought to. I mean, I think that at the moment we pay through the Duchy of Cornwall, which is not private property, despite their claim it is. We pay William a personal income of about £25 million a year, which is 6 times the combined incomes of all the elected heads of state of Europe, at least. And for that, he does very little. I mean, if you look at his calendar, his schedule of engagements, which are typically an hour long, if that, it really doesn't add up to much. And
just before you get sorry to interrupt you, Graham, but obviously he's only seen in public for an hour or two a day. I accept your point on that, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes.
Well, I dispute that, because I think that there's no evidence of this work. Other people do lots of work behind the scenes. There's no evidence that he does, and a lot of what he puts on the engagement schedule is also stuff that he does behind the scenes, including Zoom calls and telephone calls. And if he's putting meetings of the Duchy of Cornwall, which he claims is private, on his list of engagements, it's just they're padding it a little bit. But the point is, we don't get an awful lot in return for £25 million or £24 million, which is an obscene amount of money to throw at one person. And so we would all be better off, including William and Kate, if they went off and did their own thing. Whether they choose to live in the States or stay here, entirely up to them. But I just don't see any point in us throwing an estimated £345 million plus at the royals, which is the more accurate figure than the sovereign grant, when they do so little, when we could actually just pay a normal salary, pegged to, say, the salary of the Prime Minister, to one person to do a very serious job of being head of state.
There's lots of charities which they are obviously patrons of, and Alistair Stewart made the point last week on this podcast that those kind of charities would not get the same leverage or kudos or funding if they didn't have a member of the royal family attached to that.
There's no evidence of that. I mean, this is the point. I mean, obviously, if a charity has a royal patron, they're not going to deny that there's benefit. And a lot of people just believe it true. But there was a report out 4 years ago done by an independent organisation that does data research for the charity sector. And they did a huge study, number crunching and statistical analysis of charities that do have royal patrons, don't have royal patrons, similar charities. For example, air ambulances, there's quite a few of those charities around the country. Some have royal patrons, some don't.
Well, Prince William's flown East Anglia Air Ambulance as a pilot.
Well, indeed. But the point is that the evidence just it makes no difference whatsoever to their income. All of these charities function just fine with or without them. And, of course, most of the royals barely have any interaction with these charities that they attach their name to. They're more likely to have interaction with the ones that they have a hand in setting up, some of which are there to push a particular agenda rather than just actually going out and looking after people or helping certain communities. So yeah, the whole charity thing is a non-starter. It doesn't make any material difference. And of course, in France and Germany and the United States, they all have huge charity sectors which thrive without having royal patrons.
Is there not an argument, though, that having a royal patron raises awareness? We saw an example of the awareness the royal family can generate earlier this year when Charles confirmed that he was having an operation on his prostate. And in the following days after that, the NHS confirmed that visits to their page online regarding information around prostate conditions were up in the hundreds, if not thousands, %wise. Yeah, so there is a clearly undeniable awareness that they bring to.
I don't know
things.
What the raw data is on that. I mean, anything can go up by hundreds of thousands of % if it starts at a relatively low number. But obviously someone who is very well known, who is all over the news for the fact that they've been diagnosed with cancer, whoever it is going to prompt that kind of reaction. But I don't think that Charles having cancer is an argument for their impact on charity. I think that there are some of the largest charities and biggest organisations don't have royal patrons. They do just fine, and there's no evidence that people choose their donating habits because of royal patrons.
Yeah, this was prior to the king confirming it was cancer. It was just him saying that he was going into the hospital to have an operation.
Yeah, well, whatever the health issue, I think people do that. It happens quite a lot. There have been other famous people in the past, I believe, that have sort of said, I'm ill with whatever, or people have died from whatever, and it prompts people to go and have a look and look online and see what's going on.
Well, representatives I have spoken to from those various charities, which you claim would function just fine without royal family, would say they need a member of the royal family, so they would dispute what you said.
Well, they wouldn't say otherwise, would they? Because they don't want to cause a row with their patron and upset their trustees. So, I mean, it's unlikely they're going to say, no, it's a completely pointless waste of time.
Okay, well, there's clearly differing opinions on that one, but we'll move on to a couple of royal engagements coming up later this year. First of all, it's been confirmed this week that Trooping the Colour is going ahead despite the general election taking place. Republic are planning a big protest that day.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how big it will be, but we're doing a protest. Yeah, we'll be down near the palace, sort of not far from where the media will be standing.
I was going to say conveniently close to where I'll be stood on the media position.
Not by coincidence. It's the whole point is to show that we are not a country of royalists and that there is an opposition to the monarchy wherever they do these big events. And you opened by saying that we're still in a minority, but the people who are enthusiastic about the monarchy are also in a minority. Most people are not that bothered, and most people that you see on the Mall at the Trooping Colour will be tourists or people who are just curious and want to see a show, which is fair enough because it's quite an extravagant parade. But our point is to say, look, there is a large and growing body of opinion that says we need to get rid of the monarchy.
Well, millions and millions of people watched the coronation last year.
Millions did, yeah, of course. But I mean, it was a huge event that was being constantly promoted on TV. But the numbers in the Mall were far smaller than they had been in previous years. I mean, the police said it was a few 100,000. So I think it's about 250,000, which is well down on previous big events. And if you look at the polling again, consistently, when you say, are you very interested in these big events? I mean, only 9% last year said that they were excited about the coronation. So if you sort of 15% in another poll saying they're very interested in it. So that's the kind of number who are the sort of people who are enthusiastic and will go down there specifically to watch it and wave a flag.
And you mentioned that you're planning a protest at Trooping the Colour.
Yeah.
And off camera, you said that you may actually take this international, and if the King and Queen do an overseas tour of Australia, you've got plans to go out there as well.
Yes, so I'm assuming, I mean, all the everything I've read so far is that their intention is to go to Australia as planned in October. So my intention is to go over there as well. We've got members and supporters over there, and of course there is a Australian Republican movement that we want to talk to, but our purpose there won't be to campaign for an Australian Republic, but to campaign for a British one, and to make the point we're going to be constantly turning up where they're turning up and saying, look, for us, you are not my king.
What do you think, going back to trooping and these big events, I'm just envisioning a situation which is perhaps what happens at the coronation as well, but in a carriage coming out of Buckingham Palace, you're going to have very young children and they're going to see these big anti-Republican protesters. What do you think they'll be feeling?
I have no idea, but I mean, I think the point is that as far as the royal children are concerned, the responsibility for them lies with the royal family, and if they're going to bring them out into these sort of big occasions, then that's what they're going to see. I think that the way that they treat their children is fairly shocking because they put them out in front of cameras and use them as props all the time, whilst at the same time demanding privacy for these children. So if you compared to some politicians bring their children out, but if you look at a lot of politicians, and I can't tell you what Keir Starmer's children look like or who they are or how many he has because he keeps them well away from the camera. Yeah. The royals don't. They use them as props.
But they're also, they've been doing it all their life. I mean, that from the moment they're born, they're put on the steps of a Lindo wing. So it's not as if they're going to be traumatized by being put out in public. So it's all they've ever known.
Well, I would argue that you shouldn't be putting children out there in public since they were born. I think they should be left in private. And I went down to the hospital to do interviews at the time that George was born, and I just found the whole thing slightly odd, seeing all these mostly middle-aged men standing out pontificating about a young woman's pregnancy outside of the very ward that she was in. And I find the whole notion of having to obsess about this very personal aspect of their lives quite odd. And I know it's sort of become this whole industry about where we feel invested in their lives and we feel some ownership over them. But I think that is part of the problem with the monarchy, is that it infantilizes our relationship with the public arena, if you like, because this is supposed to be just one head of state doing a job. We should choose them, get rid of them if we don't want them, and that's it. We don't need all the family drama.
So with that in mind, what do you make about all this speculation around Princess of Wales and the public scrutiny on her?
Yeah, well, I think that if she is on the public payroll and there's an expectation that she does something in return for the lavish lifestyle, so knowing that she's got cancer and therefore that's why she's not around is fair enough. But I just think that whole need to get into the private life of these people is unhealthy. I think a lot of the speculation was just bordering on slightly bizarre, but then there's also been a whole load of slightly more fawning conversation and speculation about her and sort of putting on this pedestal. And she is just a regular person going through a tough time, and she should be left to get on with it with her family, and it doesn't need any more than that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
So we've just had Graham join us on the Royal Record podcast. Cameron, what did you make of it?
Well, there was a lot of kind of facts and figures there of like how much the royal family costs, and also he clearly put across his arguments as to why he wants an elected head of state rather than a British monarchy. And I mean, I stressed this point to him that, I go to a number of the engagements that royal family members have been to, and when you meet charity members, members of the charity who the member of the royal family is promoting, they always are so grateful for the support of that member of the royal family and the kind of financial revenue and the kudos it gives to that particular charity. Now, his argument to that was, well, it's just PR. They're always going to say that to you. But I just think, even looking at the visit that the King and Queen did to the Macmillan Cancer Unit in central London, his first engagement post cancer treatment, and just seeing the look on patients' faces of meeting the King or meeting the Queen, you can't really put a price on that.
Yeah, I agree. And even we can take it back to last week's podcast and listening to Alistair Stewart talk about the invaluable work that he thinks the royal family do. He spoke so highly about Queen Camilla and Princess Anne and the part they play in raising awareness for charities. So yeah, I think that there's some elements that the royal family bring that are priceless, and I think Graham overlooked that.
Yeah, I think there's a good saying that if you were setting up a country today, perhaps a hereditary monarchy would not be the one. However, I think a constitutional monarchy, or people would say a constitutional monarchy, is the best bad idea we've got, as opposed to any other way that a country is run. But of course, people's opinions differ. There are Republicans here in the United Kingdom, and they believe that Britain should have an elected head of state rather than a monarch. And do let us know what you think. royal@gbnews.uk. Should we keep King Charles and his descendants as head of state of the United Kingdom? Let us know.
Yeah, and I did think one thing that was really interesting that Graham said is, he said it off the back of our GB News membership poll, which is overwhelmingly in favour of keeping King Charles as the head of state of the UK. He said if you feel that way, you should vote for King Charles, just as he, if there was a referendum, would vote against keeping King Charles in the head of state. And it brings us on to the fact that there is now a general election up and coming.
Yeah, so when we were recording the episode of the podcast last week with Alistair, I had a horrible, sneaky suspicion in the back of my mind from hearing various rumours and sources that I would have to rush out this studio, and we film in Westminster, to stand in the rain for hours outside Buckingham Palace to talk about the King's role in approving a general election. And lo and behold, just a couple of hours after, that's exactly what happened. But I did have an umbrella, unlike Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, and so Sunak has now called a general election for July 4th. With that, we know there'll be a limited amount of royal engagements during this time.
Yeah.
But one thing that we do know that is going ahead is trooping the colour.
Yeah, we absolutely do. So King Charles approves the Prime Minister's request to hold a general election on the 4th of July, and also dissolve Parliament today, as in Thursday, 30th of May. So he effectively is going to fire all the MPs. They will cease being members of parliament. Government ministers will remain government ministers. But of course, then they'll be campaigning to get their seats back come July the 4th. And as you say, Svar, to avoid distracting from a general election, avoid distracting from political issues, Buckingham Palace has announced that members of the royal family will not be carrying out as many public engagements which would seek to distract from the election. But we do know, as you say, that trooping is taking place and the D-Day commemorations are taking place as well. But that does lead us on to a big question around trooping, because Irish Guards this year are going to be the regiments of the Household Division trooping their colour on Horse Guards Parade. And the Princess of Wales is the Irish Guards colonel. So usually, if it wasn't for the princess's health, she would be expected to take part in the Colonel's Review on the Horse Guards Parade. That's happening the 8th of June, the week before trooping the colour. And there's a huge question mark over that. Earlier this year, the British Army messed up a little bit by perhaps jumping the gun a bit and saying the princess was absolutely going to be taking part in the Colonel's Review. They had to roll back on that, delete it from their website. And now, of course, we know the princess has cancer.
Yeah, and there's been still no confirmation as to whether Kate will take part at all in either the Colonel's Review or trooping the colour. There were reports this week that Kate has been out and about with Prince William and their children over the last few weeks. This has not been confirmed by Kensington Palace, but these reports may signal that Kate is closer to a return than we think. However, I would stress that at the briefing last week with Kensington Palace, they were adamant that the princess is not close to returning to work.
Yeah, well, it's a half term this week, so we wouldn't be expecting to see Prince William or the princess on any engagements anyway, because they always have the children's holiday off because they're young children. They want to spend time as a family, so it doesn't surprise me that there's reports that they're kind of out and about. But as you say, Svar, I think we do need to be cautious. The princess is only going to be out and about when doctors give the green light. Kensington Palace and herself, in the video she gave when she disclosed that she was having preventative chemotherapy, was that she needs to be given the time and the space to recover, and she will be back when she is ready and able to do so. And there is, I'm afraid, not a time frame on that. So we may well want to see her at the Colonel's Review on the 8th of June. We may well want to see her on the Buckingham Palace balcony on the 15th of June for the King's birthday parade. And unfortunately, we simply don't know. So all we can do is wait, be patient, and wish the princess all the best.
Yeah. What do you think it would mean to the British public if we did see Kate on that balcony on the 15th of June?
I mean, it would be an explosion of support. I think that's very clear. It has been reported this week that Buckingham Palace has been inundated with cards and letters for the princess. Kensington Palace, similarly, I suspect, has been as well. And there is a huge outpouring of support for the princess throughout the world. So I think it would be genuinely really celebratory. But it would inevitably distract from the King's birthday parade, and that is the whole point, celebrating the King's official birthday. It's the army's present, I suppose, and the government's present to the King, this pomp and pageantry of celebrating the British army and marching down the Mall, and all the headlines would inevitably be Princess of Wales returns to work. But I think that's jumping the gun a bit, as I say. That's clearly just a lot of speculation, and we simply don't know if she is going to be on that balcony or not. If she does, it will be a nice surprise. If she doesn't, I don't think we should be too disappointed, and we'll just wait until she's ready to be back.
Yeah, and you mentioned a distraction on the King's birthday. Mm-hmm. We have seen over the last couple trooping the colours, Prince Louis stealing the show. Do we think we will see Louis, Charlotte and George during this, with or without Kate?
I suspect we probably will, because we saw Prince George with his father at the FA Cup final at the weekend. So William's clearly okay for them to be out and about, and trooping is something they've done pretty much every year. So I suspect they probably would do it without their mother as well. Everyone loves seeing cheeky Louis on the balcony. The Queen disclosed that he's a little bit of a handful, as we perhaps have seen in previous years. So I think it would be nice to see the royal children on that balcony, because it has been a pretty tough 6 months for the royal family, and I think the British public would really appreciate seeing them. But it's clearly up to William. They are very, and Catherine as well, they are very young children, and if it is too much for them with the princess's condition, I suspect the British public won't be too upset, will understand why we're not going to see those children on the balcony. But we'll just have to wait and see. They never, ever publicly confirm that we're going to see the children on the balcony ahead of time. So it would just be a nice surprise if it happens.
Yep. One member of the royal family that we know will not be on the balcony is Prince Harry.
No.
But he is involved in a court case in the US at the moment. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, is battling the Biden administration to release the Duke of Sussex's US visa documents. There was a development this week where transcripts from February were released, which showed the Biden administration arguing that releasing Harry's visa documents would possibly cause a stigma for Harry. What did you make of that?
Yeah, well, let's rewind a little bit and give the context to this particular case. So Prince Harry and Meghan stood back as working members of the royal family in March 2020. They moved to the United States via Canada. Prince Harry would have applied for a visa to enter the United States and lived there. Now, during his memoir Spare, he admitted to taking marijuana, cocaine, and psychedelic mushrooms. Under US immigration law, you cannot lie on your immigration record to say you have not done illegal substances if you have done so, because that is, under law, grounds for deportation. It's not necessarily grounds for deportation if you do publicly disclose that on the forms. What the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. wants to know is, A, did Harry lie on his immigration form, and therefore what's the consequences for Harry? Or B, he told the truth on the immigration form, and the US Department for Homeland Security, in other words, the Biden administration, granted him a visa anyway, in which case, on what grounds did they grant that visa, and did they give Harry special treatment? So that's the crux of the case.
Yeah, I think if the documents are released, it's a lose-lose situation for Prince Harry. As you've said, he's either lied on his documents, and the penalty could be really harsh for that, including being deported, or he admitted to taking drugs on his documents, in which case it raises questions about whether he received special treatment as a member of the royal family. The US ambassador for the UK has vowed that he will not be deported under the Biden administration. But yeah, I think it's a really uncomfortable situation for Harry. We have seen celebrities in the past denied entry to the US following an admission of drug use, and we did do an exclusive with Donald Trump last year where he said that Harry wouldn't receive as much favourable treatment from him if he was the US president as the Biden administration have given him. So yeah, Harry could be in hot waters, couldn't he?
Well, yeah, I think the problem now is this is going to turn political, because as you say, Jane Hartley, the US ambassador to the UK, has said he's never going to be deported, come what may, under Biden administration. Trump said appropriate action will be taken. But the question for a future President Trump, if it happens post November 4th and he becomes president in January, it may not, but if it does, what does appropriate action mean? Does that mean he's going to deport Prince Harry? Is he really going to break up a young family when Harry has 2 young children and a wife living in California with him, and force him to go back to the United Kingdom? What does that do for diplomatic relations? Because Prince Harry is still 5th in line to the throne. He's still the king's son. So in terms of a US-UK soft relationship, I'm not sure how well that's going to go down. Or is it simply going to be a slap on the wrist? And the point is, we simply do not know. But it is creating a lot of this distraction. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this case plays out, whether the court rules that Prince Harry's visa documents can remain secret, in which case I suspect it's all going to be swept under the carpet, whatever happens on that visa application. But Pandora's box could very much be opened if the court orders the US government to make Prince Harry's visa documents public.
Yeah, and a report that I saw earlier this month that really interested me was an immigration lawyer saying that there was a possibility that Harry received a rare US visa that may have resulted in a lower security check. So there's something called the A1 head of state visa, which is different from the A1 visa, which is for senior diplomats. An A1 head of state visa holder is free to come to the US without working as a member of the royal family or holding the position of head of state. And the immigration lawyer said regarding the A1 head of state visa, the security check is not the same. It's a lower security check. It's a visa, especially for members of the royal family. For an A1 head of state visa, the security and background check questions are not the same as for most applicants. And crucially, they are only vetted for espionage, terrorism, and activities that contrary to US foreign policy, i.e. Prince Harry's drug use would not have been covered on his visa forms if he did receive an A1 head of state visa.
Yeah, and the fact is we do not know what kind of visa Prince Harry has. There's a number it could have been. You just stated one of them. I also think there's an argument that it's a little bit perhaps unfair that Prince Harry is getting so much scrutiny for this, where, as you said earlier, a lot of celebrities perhaps are taking illegal substances and then to the US, and it doesn't really matter. So, we'll see how that case pans out for sure. But we have been having a few viewer questions in. Svar, I believe you've got one, which was quite interesting.
Yes, so off the back of our discussion about Beatrice and Eugenie attending the Buckingham Palace garden party hosted by Prince William last week, a viewer got in contact with us and asked, how happy were you to see the cousins supporting William?
Yeah, I thought it was quite a nice surprise. I think people at the garden party thought it was a lovely surprise as well. And we do know, first reported in the Telegraph, but I understand this is very much the case, that Prince William does want to see his cousins take on a bit more of an informal role when it comes to engagements. This idea of a slimmed down monarchy, I think, might start to be a thing of the past, particularly because we have the Princess of Wales out of action at the moment because of her cancer treatment, similar with the King as well. And I think, as reported in the Telegraph, it is a case of Prince William taking after his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, rallying around his cousins, like Queen Elizabeth did, and asking them to help out as and when. So watch this space. I suspect we may see Princess Eugenie, Princess Beatrice, Zara Tindall, Mike Tindall, Peter Phillips, out and about doing more engagements for the royal family in an informal capacity. But I must stress that does not mean becoming working royals.
Yeah. And you said we'll see them potentially out and about doing engagements for the royal family. Do you think there's a chance we'll see them on the balcony on June 15th?
I mean, there's always a chance. It would definitely put Harry and Meghan's noses out of joint if that does happen. But also, that is not Prince William's choice. That is the King's choice. It's up to him if he wants them on the balcony. Well, that question was from Jack, so thank you so much, Jack, for sending in that question. If you want to send in your own, then feel free to email us, royal@gbnews.uk. Use the hashtag GBN Royal Record as well, and we will be happily answering them next week. But that is all we've got time for on the Royal Record. Thank you so much for listening or watching.
And don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest royal news and analysis at gbnews.com/royal or by signing up to the GB News Royal Newsletter.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a 5-star on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcast from. We cannot wait for you to join us next week. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.